Princess Nyara stood at the crystalline window of her chamber in the floating palace of Luminara, her iridescent skin reflecting the light of 3 moons. The news her father had delivered moments ago still echoed in her mind: she was to marry a human, Commander Marcus Drake of the Terran fleet. The Celestial Empire had long viewed humans as dangerous, unpredictable creatures who had somehow managed to master space travel despite their primitive emotional nature. Stories of their wars, their violence, and their relentless expansion had reached even the highest spires of Luminara. And now, Nyara was expected to bind herself to one of them. "My daughter," Emperor Theron had said, his luminous eyes dimming with concern, "our empire stands at a crossroads. The human territories grow stronger each cycle, and we must either forge an alliance or face inevitable conflict. This marriage will secure peace for generations to come." Nyara's attendant, Lyra, approached quietly, her footsteps barely whispered against the crystal floor. "Your Highness, shall I begin preparations for the arrival ceremony? The human delegation will reach our orbit within 3 rotations." 3 rotations, Nyara repeated softly, her voice carrying the musical quality characteristic of her species. "How can Father expect me to accept this? The humans, they're so different from us. Their lifespans are barely a quarter of ours, their customs are foreign, and their reputation." Lyra moved closer, adjusting the flowing robes that shifted colors with Nyara's emotions, currently a deep indigo of distress. "Perhaps, Your Highness, the stories we've heard are not entirely accurate. The diplomatic corps reports that Commander Drake has shown remarkable restraint and wisdom in his dealings with other species." "Restraint?" Nyara turned from the window, her bioluminescent markings pulsing with anxiety. "They say he led the campaign against the Syndicate worlds, that his tactics were so unexpected and fierce that 3 systems surrendered without a fight. How can someone capable of such actions be suitable for a peaceful alliance?" The palace archives had provided detailed reports of Commander Drake's military career, each victory more impressive and troubling than the last. He had risen through the ranks not through political maneuvering like most human officers, but through sheer tactical brilliance and what the reports called unconventional problem-solving. As the day's cycle progressed, Nyara found herself drawn to the historical archives, searching for any information about human-celestial interactions. The records were sparse, their peoples had largely avoided each other, separated by mutual distrust and vast distances. But now, with the discovery of new hyperlane routes, isolation was no longer possible. "Your Highness," a new voice called, and Nyara looked up to see Royal Advisor Venna entering the archive chamber. The Elder Celestial's markings glowed with a steady, calming blue. "I thought I might find you here. Your father asked me to share something with you about Commander Drake that isn't in the official records." Nyara straightened, her curiosity piqued despite her reservations. Venna approached, producing a small holographic projector. This was recorded during the Syndicate Wars, specifically during the Siege of Haven Colony. The projection sprang to life, showing a battle-scarred human ship hovering near a civilian station. Nyara watched as escape pods streamed from the station, not just human vessels, but craft from a dozen different species. The human ship, despite taking heavy fire, maintained its position, protecting the evacuees. "That was Commander Drake's vessel," Venna explained. "He held that position for 26 hours, allowing refugees to escape while Syndicate forces attempted to capture the station. When asked why he risked his ship and crew for non-human civilians, he reportedly said, 'Compassion isn't bound by species.'" Nyara studied the recording, watching as the human ship took hit after hit but refused to abandon its protective position. It wasn't the action of someone driven purely by military conquest. There was something more there, something that didn't fit with the stories she'd been raised on. "I understand your fears, Princess," Venna continued, her voice gentle. "But perhaps this alliance offers more than just political advantage. Perhaps it offers an opportunity to bridge the gap between our peoples, to move beyond ancient prejudices and find common ground." As the day's cycle faded into night, Nyara returned to her chambers, her mind full of conflicting thoughts. The commander was still a mystery, a paradox of military might and reported compassion. In 3 rotations, she would meet him face to face, and the future of 2 civilizations would begin to take shape. Standing once again at her window, watching the distant stars, Nyara made a decision. She would not let fear rule her. She would meet this human commander with an open mind, ready to discover the truth behind the stories. After all, if he could protect refugees under fire for 26 hours, perhaps there was hope for understanding between their peoples after all. The human ship emerged from hyperspace like a silver arrow cutting through the darkness, its sleek design a stark contrast to the organic curves of celestial architecture. Princess Nyara watched from the observatory spire as the vessel approached, her bioluminescent markings flickering with nervous energy. Commander Marcus Drake's arrival had thrown the entire palace into carefully controlled chaos. Servants rushed through crystal corridors, preparing quarters that would accommodate human biology. Environmental systems were adjusted to match Earth standard gravity and atmosphere in designated areas. Even the traditional welcome feast had been modified to include dishes safe for human consumption. The human ship requests docking clearance, Your Highness, announced Lyra, her own markings pulsing with anticipation. They've followed our approach protocols perfectly. Nyara nodded, surprised. Most species found celestial docking procedures unnecessarily complex, yet the humans had mastered them without complaint. Another piece that didn't fit with their reputation for brute force and impatience. Through the observatory's enhanced viewing field, Nyara caught her first glimpse of Commander Drake as he disembarked. He moved with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with humanity's higher gravity origins. His uniform was simple but immaculate, lacking the excessive ornamentation many military leaders favored. But it was his expression that caught her attention, alert but serene, taking in his surroundings with interest rather than suspicion. I expected him to bring more guards, Nyara murmured, noting the small size of his entourage. Perhaps he trusts in our hospitality, Lyra suggested. Or perhaps he is more confident in his own abilities than in numbers. Nyara watched as her father greeted the human commander. Even from this distance, she could see that Drake stood eye to eye with Emperor Theron, unusual, as most species had to look up to the tall Celestials. Their exchange seemed cordial, with Drake offering a respectful bow that mimicked celestial custom without appearing awkward. Over the next few cycles, Nyara found herself drawn to observe the commander from afar. She used the palace's crystal architecture to her advantage, its transparent properties allowing her to watch while remaining unseen. What she discovered continued to challenge her preconceptions. Drake spent hours in the cultural archives, studying celestial history and customs with genuine interest. During diplomatic meetings, he listened more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions that showed real desire to understand their ways. In the palace gardens, he paused to admire the bioluminescent flora, showing no disgust at its alien nature. One incident particularly caught her attention. A young servant had accidentally activated a gravity fluctuation, sending a tray of delicate crystal implements crashing toward the floor. Drake had reacted with startling speed, diving forward to catch the tray while simultaneously steadying the servant with his other hand. "Please be careful," he'd said, his voice gentle. "Are you all right?" The servant had stared at him in shock, clearly expecting anger or punishment. Drake had simply helped steady the tray and asked about the proper handling of celestial crystalware, turning the moment into an opportunity for learning rather than discipline. "He's nothing like the stories," Nyara confided to Vena during their evening meeting. "Where is the fierce warrior who made entire systems surrender? Where is the ruthless human commander?" Vena's markings glowed with amusement. "Perhaps, Your Highness, true strength lies not in how much force one can exert, but in knowing when not to use it at all." As if to test this theory, Nyara arranged to observe one of Drake's training sessions. The palace guard had offered their training grounds out of courtesy, and Drake had accepted with enthusiasm. She expected to finally see the warrior emerge. Instead, she watched in fascination as Drake spent more time teaching than fighting. He showed the guards human martial arts techniques, explaining the principles behind them and how they could be adapted to celestial physiology. When sparring, he held back just enough to challenge his opponents without overwhelming them, turning each match into a learning experience. "Your guards are exceptional," she overheard him tell the captain afterward. "I'm honored to train with them. There's so much we could learn from each other if we put aside our differences." That evening, as Nyara prepared for another formal dinner, she found her fear of the upcoming marriage being replaced by curiosity. Commander Drake was clearly more than his military reputation suggested. He was patient, intelligent, and seemingly genuine in his desire to understand her people. "Perhaps," she whispered to herself, watching the 3 moons rise outside her window, "this arrangement isn't the diplomatic prison I feared it would be." But as she headed to the dinner, a new worry gnawed at her. What if this was all an act? What if Drake's careful courtesy was simply a mask, hiding his true nature? After all, humans were known for their ability to deceive, to play political games. Yet something in her heart told her otherwise. The small moments she had witnessed, his kindness to servants, his genuine interest in their culture, his patient teaching, those couldn't all be false. There was more to Commander Marcus Drake than met the eye, and for the first time since learning of her arranged marriage, Nyara found herself looking forward to discovering exactly what that might be. The moment Nyara had both anticipated and dreaded finally arrived during the Festival of Lights, when all 3 moons aligned and the Crystal Palace blazed with natural luminescence. She hadn't planned to reveal herself to Commander Drake yet, but fate had other ideas. While observing him from her favorite hidden alcove in the garden, Nyara's concentration slipped, and her bioluminescent markings flared with surprise when Drake stopped to examine a rare night-blooming crystal flower. The sudden glow gave away her position. "Your Highness," Drake said softly, without turning around. "I was wondering when you would decide to speak with me." Nyara froze, her markings pulsing with embarrassment. "You knew I was watching." Now Drake turned, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm trained to notice details. Your reflection in the crystal walls, the way servants glance up at certain alcoves, the subtle shift of light when you move." His eyes met hers directly, but without challenge. "I thought it best to let you observe until you felt comfortable approaching." Stepping out from her hiding place, Nyara felt strangely exposed despite her formal robes. "How diplomatic of you." "Not diplomacy, princess. Respect." Drake gestured to the crystal flower. "I understand your caution. I've read about the historical conflicts between our peoples, the misunderstandings and fears on both sides. If I were in your position, I would want to observe too." His honesty caught her off guard. She had expected smooth words and political maneuvering, not this direct acknowledgement of their situation. "You are not what I expected, Commander Drake. Please, call me Marcus." He turned back to the flower, his expression thoughtful. "And you're not quite what I expected either. Your people's diplomatic court described you as reserved and traditional. They failed to mention your curiosity and courage." "Courage?" Nyara moved closer, intrigued despite herself. "It takes courage to watch and learn instead of relying on prejudice. To seek understanding rather than accepting fear." He glanced at her. "I've noticed how you interact with your people, how you listen to their concerns. You care deeply about their well-being." Nyara's markings shifted to a deeper blue of surprise. He had been observing her too, it seemed. "As do you. I saw how you treated the servant with the crystal tray." Marcus nodded. "Every person deserves respect, regardless of their position or species. That's something my mother taught me, before." He trailed off, a shadow crossing his face. "Before what?" Nyara found herself asking, curious about this glimpse of personal history. But before he could answer, a chime echoed through the garden, the signal for evening meditation. Nyara hesitated, torn between duty and curiosity. To her surprise, Marcus gave a perfect celestial bow. Perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow. I would enjoy learning more about the Festival of Lights from someone who has experienced it firsthand. Nyara found herself agreeing before she could second-guess the decision. As she headed to meditation, her mind raced. This first real interaction had left her with more questions than answers, but they were different questions now. Not about his reputation or intentions, but about his past, his thoughts, the person behind the diplomatic facade. Over the next few days, they met regularly in the garden. Each conversation revealed new layers to Marcus's character. He spoke of Earth's oceans with such longing that Nyara could almost see them. He asked thoughtful questions about celestial culture, not just the diplomatic necessities but the small details, the meaning behind different color patterns in their markings, the stories they told their children, the songs sung during the Festival of Lights. During one such conversation, an alert sounded through the palace. A training exercise had gone wrong, and one of the gravity generators was malfunctioning. Without hesitation, Marcus rushed toward the danger, Nyara close behind. They found several guards trapped in a fluctuating gravity field, being tossed about dangerously. While others stood back, Marcus analyzed the situation quickly, timing the fluctuations. Then, to Nyara's horror, he dove into the field. Using the varying gravity to his advantage, he moved from guard to guard, helping them time their movements to reach safety. His actions were precise, calculated, yet daring. This, Nyara realized, was the commander from the stories, not a mindless warrior, but someone who could assess risks and act decisively to protect others. When the last guard was safe, Marcus emerged, slightly battered but triumphant. He immediately began checking on the injured, showing genuine concern for their welfare. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Nyara said when she finally got a moment alone with him. Marcus smiled wryly. "Sometimes they're the same thing. I couldn't stand by when I knew I could help." Looking at him then, Nyara felt something shift in her understanding. The fierce commander and the gentle diplomat weren't separate masks, they were parts of the same whole, a complex person who could be both warrior and peacemaker. "I think," she said slowly, her markings glowing with a new warmth, "I'm beginning to understand why my father chose you for this alliance." Marcus's expression softened. "And I'm beginning to think he chose very wisely indeed." As the Festival of Lights continued, Nyara and Marcus found themselves drawn to the Celestial Archives, a vast chamber where crystal columns stored the combined knowledge of generations. The soft glow of the archives created an intimate atmosphere as they sat among the ancient records. "You never finished telling me about your mother," Nyara said softly, her markings glowing with gentle curiosity. "What did she teach you about respect?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the crystal table between them. "My mother was a xenobiologist," he finally began. "She studied different species, but not just their biology. She was fascinated by their cultures, their ways of thinking. She taught me that understanding others was the key to peace." "What happened to her?" Nyara asked, sensing the weight of untold story in his words. "There was a conflict, early in my career. The Syndicate Worlds had attacked a research station where she was working. They didn't care about the scientists or their work, they just wanted the station's strategic position." His voice grew distant. "I was part of the rescue fleet, but we arrived too late. The station was destroyed. My mother, along with scientists from 12 different species, died in the attack." Nyara's markings pulsed with sympathy. "Is that why you became the commander known for protecting civilian stations? Like in the Haven Colony incident?" Marcus looked up, surprised. "You know about that? Advisor Venna showed me the recording. You held position for 26 hours, protecting the evacuees. I couldn't let what happened to my mother happen again." Marcus's eyes held a mix of determination and old pain. The Syndicate Worlds thought they could target civilians with impunity. They expected everyone to run, to save themselves. But my mother taught me that all life is precious, regardless of species. So I chose to stand and fight. Understanding dawned in Nyara's mind. That's why they call you ruthless. Not because you love violence, but because you refuse to back down when protecting others. The syndicate didn't understand. They saw strength only in terms of destruction. They never realized that the strongest barrier is one built from compassion and unity. He smiled slightly. That's why this alliance between our peoples is so important. It's not just about preventing war, it's about showing the galaxy a better way forward. Their conversation was interrupted by a group of young celestial children who had wandered into the archives. Instead of shooing them away, Marcus smiled and asked if they'd like to hear a story. Soon, he was describing Earth's oceans to their wide-eyed wonder, using small holograms to show waves and sea creatures. Nyara watched, fascinated by how naturally he interacted with the children. His face lit up as he answered their endless questions, never showing impatience or condescension. This was a side of him she hadn't expected, a natural teacher, sharing his world with genuine enthusiasm. Later, as they walked through the moonlit gardens, Nyara found herself sharing her own stories. She told him about growing up in the Crystal Palace, about the pressure of being the future leader of her people, about her initial fear of humans and how it was slowly being replaced by understanding. I used to think humans were dangerous because of your emotions, she admitted. We Celestials pride ourselves on control, on rational thought. But watching you, I'm starting to think perhaps emotions aren't a weakness after all. Marcus stopped walking, turning to face her. Emotions can be a source of strength when properly channeled. My anger at what happened to my mother could have turned me bitter, made me seek revenge. Instead, I chose to use it as motivation to protect others. Your people's rationality is admirable, but sometimes the heart sees truth that the mind overlooks. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the three moons cast their light through the crystal spires of the palace. Nyara's markings had taken on a soft, rose-colored glow that she hoped Marcus couldn't interpret. Tomorrow is the final ceremony of the festival, she said. Would you like to attend it with me? Not as a diplomatic gesture, but as my guest. Marcus's smile was warm. I'd be honored, Nyara. As she prepared for sleep that night, Nyara realized something had fundamentally shifted between them. The arranged marriage no longer felt like a duty to be endured but a partnership to be explored. Marcus Drake was not the ruthless commander she had feared, nor was he simply a diplomatic tool. He was complex, thoughtful, shaped by loss but not hardened by it. Most importantly, she was beginning to see how their differences could be complementary rather than divisive. His passion balanced her restraint, her wisdom tempered his daring. Together, perhaps they could indeed show the galaxy a better way forward. The final night of the Festival of Lights transformed the Crystal Palace into a symphony of color and light. The three moons hung perfectly aligned in the sky, their combined radiance making the crystal structures pulse with internal fire. For the first time in celestial history, the sacred ceremony would unite not just their people, but two very different species. Nyara stood before her mirror, her ceremonial robes shifting through colors that matched her swirling emotions. Her markings glowed with an intensity that reflected her anticipation. This was not the same nervous energy she had felt when first learning of her arranged marriage, this was something deeper, more meaningful. Your Highness, Lyra said softly, adjusting the crystalline crown on Nyara's head, the human delegation has arrived. Commander Drake awaits you in the Grand Hall. The walk to the Grand Hall felt both eternal and too brief. As the doors opened, Nyara saw Marcus standing near the central crystal spire, dressed in a formal uniform that incorporated elements of both human and celestial design. When he turned to look at her, his expression made her markings pulse with a bright, rose-colored glow. You look radiant, he said quietly as she approached, and she could hear the genuine wonder in his voice. The ceremony began with traditional celestial songs, their crystalline notes echoing through the hall. To everyone's surprise, Marcus had learned the ancient responses, his human voice adding a new depth to the familiar melodies. When it came time for their vows, they chose to blend both human and celestial traditions. Under the light of 3 moons, Nyara began in the traditional way, her markings synchronized with the pulse of the crystal spire. I pledge to stand beside you, to learn from our differences, and to build a future that honors both our peoples. Marcus's response combined Earth customs with deep respect for celestial culture. With the stars as our witnesses, I pledge my strength to protect, my mind to understand, and my heart to bridge the gap between our worlds. Together, we will show that diversity brings strength, and understanding conquers fear. As they exchanged rings, a human tradition, and crystal pendants, a celestial one, Nyara remembered their first real conversation in the garden. How far they had come from those moments of uncertainty and hidden observation. Now they stood together, not as representatives of their species, but as 2 individuals who had found understanding despite their differences. The celebration that followed was unlike anything either culture had seen before. Humans and celestials mingled freely, sharing stories and customs. Marcus's crew taught celestial children earth dances, while celestial elders demonstrated their traditional light-weaving arts to fascinated human scientists. Later, in a quiet moment on their favorite garden balcony, Nyara and Marcus watched the 3 moons begin their slow separation in the night sky. I was so afraid of you at first, Nyara admitted, her markings glowing with gentle amusement at the memory. The ruthless human commander who made entire systems surrender. Marcus smiled, taking her hand. And I was intimidated by you, the perfectly controlled celestial princess who could see through diplomatic facades. We were both right, in a way, Nyara mused. You are capable of being ruthless when protecting others, and I do see through facades. But we're also so much more than what others see. That's the beauty of it, Marcus said, looking out at the stars. Neither of us had to change who we are. We just had to be willing to look past our preconceptions and see the truth in each other. A shooting star streaked across the sky, its light refracting through the crystal spires of the palace. Nyara's markings pulsed with joy as she thought about their future together. There would be challenges ahead, 2 different species learning to live together, 2 cultures learning to blend while maintaining their unique identities. But now she faced those challenges with hope rather than fear. What are you thinking about? Marcus asked, noticing the shifting colors of her markings. About paths not taken, she replied. If I had let fear rule me, if you had lived up to the ruthless reputation others gave you, if either of us had been unwilling to look deeper, we would have missed something extraordinary. Marcus nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes the best futures come from being willing to question what we think we know. As the night deepened, they remained on the balcony, talking about their hopes for the future. They discussed plans for cultural exchange programs, for joint scientific ventures, for new ways to bring their peoples together. But more than that, they talked about their own journey, from fear to understanding, from duty to choice, from arranged marriage to true partnership. The crystal palace glowed around them, its light a testament to the power of unity through understanding. In the end, their story would become more than just a diplomatic arrangement. It would be remembered as the moment when 2 worlds truly began to see each other not through the lens of fear, but through the crystal-clear vision of hope.